The average person hears the term circular economy and has no idea what that is. And from experience, very few of our elected officials know either. And that needs to change fast, because let me tell you, this is a huge long-term megatrend, and ignoring it is an enormous risk for Canada. If the world keeps using the stuff that we sell over and over again, they won't need our stuff anymore. So we need to figure this out, and quickly. We'll hear how, and how our fastest way forward is through sustainable procurement. Hi there. Welcome to the Clean50 CleanReset webcast series. I'm your host, Gavin Pitchford, the CEO of Delta Management Group, and also the Executive Director of the Canada's Clean50 Awards organization. Delta is 28 years old. Today, we're the only executive search firm in Canada whose practice is now devoted exclusively to green professionals. Our typical mandates include Chief Sustainable Development Officers, ESG analysts, clean tech CEOs, smart building strategy experts, or environmental NGO leaders. As we launched this then new area of practice some 10 years ago, we became aware of two things. First, that solving climate change was going to take insight and ideas from every single corner of the economy. And second, that sustainability leaders in different silos were simply not engaging with each other as they needed to be. So to meet that need, we founded the Canada's Clean50 Awards program. And every year since, we've identified, recognized, and most importantly, connected 50 individual leaders, 10 emerging leaders, and the project managers from the top 20 sustainability projects across the country and from every possible segment of the economy. Each year, we bring all of these new honorees together at the annual Clean50 Summit. We connect them with each other and also with our existing Clean50 members. We now have some 600 amazing people who have won Clean50 awards for their impact in fighting climate change. They range from the CEOs and senior executives of organizations like Loblaw, HP, and Unilever, to brilliant R&D scientists, and to entrepreneurs you've never heard of, toiling away at small business and labs and universities across the country. Today, we're presented with the COVID-19 crisis. Typically, when crises hit, governments push panic buttons and jump on any project to create jobs, as long as it's shovel ready. We build a bridge here, an extra line of highway there, and soon after, the jobs go away. The problem with that approach is that it's incredibly short-sighted and at best a temporary fix. What we need to do instead is to have a clean reset strategy, shovel ready and shovel worthy, projects to rebuild Canada's economy and do so with durable long-term jobs in strategic industries. How? By focusing on investing in the low carbon economy, one that can grow and prosper as climate change increasingly impacts the entire globe. Climate solutions alone are expected to be a $26 trillion opportunity over the next 9 years, and Canada can get its share. But to do so, we need to decide right now if we want to be one of the suppliers or build another lane of highway and become the buyers of those solutions. For every $1 million our government invests in the dying fossil fuel extraction industry, we get just 2.7 jobs. But done right, an investment in just about any part of the low carbon economy generates between 3 and 5 times that number, and as many as nearly 10 times that number. Between 7 and 20 odd jobs per $1 million of investment, depending upon the industry segment. Best of all, a lot of that investment is just that, an investment, money that will be repaid or recouped by taxpayers, not swallowed up because some Saudi-based oil sheikh or the Russian oligarch decided to bump production and push down oil prices to a number that puts Canada out of business. When the COVID crisis hit, about 100 of our members immediately recognized we had this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that when we reset, that when we use that incoming government impetus spending, we could do so to set Canada on a clear path to a more prosperous future where we export our brain power instead of our resources. 58% of Canadians support that idea. This group of industry experts spent several weeks working on a plan as to how we might best invest government stimulus spending to expand our low carbon economy. And then on Earth Day, we put that plan forward in a letter to the government, ultimately signed by over 220 members of the Clean50, 170 of their employers, ranging from multinationals like HP Canada and Unilever to small, medium enterprises. Another 35 organizations, including the Green Party of Canada and the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, immediately endorsed the plan. The latter said our plan wouldn't just create jobs, it would save lives and cut government health costs. And now, via a series of web and podcasts, we're bringing together expert panels to discuss various elements of our Clean Reset plan and discuss the ways in which our proposals can help Canada rebuild with a low carbon economy and millions of future-proof and durable jobs. The Canadian government is now taking advice on how to best leverage the principles of the circular economy as a strategy to boost Canada's output while reducing our use of raw materials and cutting GHGs. Tima, as the person tasked to lead that expert panel, would you please lead us off by describing to us what we mean by the circular economy?
Gavin, thank you very much for inviting me to this webcast. So what is the circular economy? It is essentially preserving the physicality of goods. And so right now our economy takes product from the earth, manufactures it, and disposes it in the earth. And so what we want to do is preserve that physical product for as long as possible. So what is the circular economy? Imagine if we had textiles that could be repurposed. Imagine if we had computers that were built or designed in a way that could be disassembled and the respective parts be reused. Imagine buildings that were passive and that had lasted for our lifetime and our children's lifetime. That's the circular economy, the sustaining of physical goods for a long period of time before they go back to the earth.
Paul, the circular economy sounds like a lot of trouble. Isn't it easier just to keep on using the take, make, use, dispose model instead of taking stuff apart, reclaiming it, and then making something new for it? Why should we be contemplating this paradigm shift?
Sure, it may be easier and cheaper in the short term, but it does come with large long-term economic risks, such as higher commodity prices due to resource scarcity, as well as negative social and environmental impacts from waste and pollution that's generated from our current system that includes things such as harmful chemicals or plastics pollution in the environment or more greenhouse gas emissions. As was mentioned, we have a linear system right now where we take, we make, and we dispose of our products and materials. About 91% of everything we extract from the planet every year in terms of the materials and energy becomes waste right now and ends up as pollution in the environment. So if we continue on our current trajectory, the total global demand for our limited resource could actually reach about 400% of our Earth's carrying capacity by 2050. So essentially, we would need about 4 planets to sustain our current consumption habits. And what the circular economy does is provides a solution to these issues, providing tremendous economic and innovation opportunities for capturing more value from our resources by keeping them in use for longer, but also simultaneously addressing the social inequalities, the environmental degradation that was mentioned. And some have said the circular economy presents about a $4.5 trillion economic opportunity in terms of economic output by 2030 that will help to build a more resilient global economy and create more jobs, and also increase the future competitiveness and resiliency of those supply chains. So some work was done, for example, by the World Economic Forum and others to show that the circular business models are more productive and they provide a competitive advantage because they create more value out of each unit of resource than the traditional linear take, make, dispose model. And we're already seeing Europe and Asia way out in front here, investing heavily. The European Union, for example, their Horizon 2020 program has been investing about $1 billion Canadian per year into the circular economy in terms of research and innovation since 2015 or so.
Tima, can you summarize the benefits for us to Canada of moving to a more circular economy?
We don't have numbers, at least I don't have numbers for Canada, but Sustainable Prosperity did some analysis for Ontario, and I'm going to use that just as an example of what the benefits could be for all of Canada. The diversion rates for Ontario right now is 23%. So that means that there is some stuff that does not go to waste, and that's 23%. If we increase that to 60%, that would increase Ontario's GDP by 1.5 billion. In an economy that's only 745 billion or so, that's not a lot, you can say. But $1.5 billion is actually a positive net gain. And this has an opportunity for Ontario and certainly for the rest of Canada. And the point is, it's not an economic loss, and it's a huge environmental benefit. When we talk about the environmental benefit, we can get lost in CO2, we can get lost in the opportunity for landfill, but we're talking about lives at stake as well. And so this is a human health issue that will help to save healthcare costs. This is a production issue. It will help to make us a more productive economy. This is a competition issue. And so we can actually be a lot more competitive across the world if we produce products that can be disassembled and reused efficiently.
Are there any other benefits for governments, Tima?
In addition to the increase in GDP and that increase in tax revenues that comes with it, there's also an increase in the number of jobs. And so they anticipate with a circular economy in Ontario alone, there'll be 13,000 jobs, direct and indirect jobs. And that, once again, raises tax revenues from a personal income tax point of view.
Paul, you said earlier, I think that 91% of what we produce ends up as waste. Obviously, we want to reverse that. But it sounds as though we're going to need some kind of a transformational new model to make that work.
Yeah, we absolutely need to transform our current economic system to be more resilient and sustainable. I think what we're seeing, though, is that many companies are already out there doing it from the bottom up because it does make sense from an economic perspective in terms of reducing operating costs, improving competitiveness, really looking at the opportunities for market retention or diversification. So there's lots of benefits to businesses. And there's a number of established and more emerging business models that support the circular economy. And I can give you a few examples. There's 5 business strategies or 5 sort of business model examples that can help to ground circular economy and the concept in terms of reality. The first one is resource recovery. And that's really about recovering useful resources from disposed materials or byproducts. And just to give you an example, there's one of Europe's largest and most efficient recycle paper mills out of the Netherlands run by Smurfit Kappa. They produce about 1 kilogram of solid waste for every ton of paper it produces compared to 32 kilograms for other competitors. And really what they're doing is sharing waste, their waste, with other industries and other companies that are finding it as a resource, almost what they call an industrial symbiosis. So they're not using any virgin wood fibers, they're using tomato stems and potato starch from nearby farmers and able to essentially cut down on their disposal costs and get new revenue streams through this sort of resource recovery model. A second one is called circular supply chains, where recycled or renewable materials are used as inputs instead of non-renewable resources. So essentially lessening the dependence on scarce resources and reducing waste. And there's a really interesting example of that out of Vancouver. It's a Vancouver-based startup and company called Chop Value, where they're essentially upcycling waste materials or taking old chopsticks and making them into furniture and other innovative consumer products, really cool designs.
I actually use chopsticks products to make the Clean50 award plaques.
Oh, nice.
The third model is product life extension, which really refers to extending the life cycle of products or assets, or in other words, how long they remain in our economy and in use. And they do that through repair or through upgrading or remanufacturing. And there's an interesting example out of Sweden called the Retuna Mall, which is the world's first ever second-hand shopping center where they have repair cafes that take old items like appliances or clothing and they repair and refurbish them, and then they sell them back to the consumers. So it's extending that life of those products. The fourth model is sharing platforms, which use digital technologies to maximize the use of underutilized assets and making possible sort of shared use of those assets or those products. So an example might be a car or a bike share. program, the use of consumer goods. They say that approximately 80% of typical household items are used only once a month. So there's a huge opportunity to create, using digital platforms and others, to share these sorts of tools and resources. For example, in Toronto, there's a tool library where members can access thousands of different tools for home renovation projects or for gardening or lawn maintenance, for example. And then the last example is product as a service. And that replaces the idea of ownership with selling a service. So, for example, selling light instead of the light bulb itself. And so companies are looking at that as a new model, and it encourages companies to own their products for longer and focus on those services like leasing models, as well as the long-term repair and maintenance of those products. So one example is Loop out of California that's making reusable branded containers and packaging for companies like Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and they're returning those for use over and over again, and they're making them out of higher quality materials so that they're not using that disposable or single-use item packaging any longer.
We have someone here with us today whose organization has actually leveraged three of these different approaches, in part because she's helped to drive the innovation behind those efforts. Frances Edmonds is the head of sustainable impact for HP Canada. Her main focus right now is to help Canada realize the potential sustainability benefits from leveraging sustainable procurement to meet our country and her organization's sustainability goals. Frances is both a multi-year member of the Clean50 and has attended every summit to date, and been an invaluable partner to us and a member of the Clean50 kitchen cabinet since the outset. Frances, HP's figured out a way to build a circular supply chain, to leverage resource recovery, and to sell your product as a service. Which one of those do you want to lead with?
Okay, thank you, Gavin. Yes, HP's made a commitment to take our entire business circular, and we've been working on this for quite some time. And it started originally with our Planet Partners program that was our Take Back and Recycling program, which is nearly 30 years old now. And metals are easy to recycle, but plastics have always been the issue. And so about 20 years ago, we started working with a Canadian organization to see if we could make plastics circular. And we started with our ink cartridges and have moved on to a wide variety of products and have been able to do it, not only making plastics circular, taking back empty cartridges, taking the plastics out, adding used plastics from other sources in, and then making that an equivalent quality and price to virgin plastic. That was pre-COVID pandemic. And we were so successful at that, we were then able to move it into other products. So we produced the world's first notebook with ocean-bound plastics, the world's first monitor, and of course, we've been doing it for some time for cartridges. Because we're adding in used plastics from other sources, we were approached by some nonprofits working in Haiti, and that's where the ocean plastics are now coming from. And we've been working on that for a couple of years now, and actually that's a Clean50 award-winning process too. And so that's the resource recovery part of it. When people think about circular economy, they often always assume that it's all about the recycling and end-of-life piece. And I would argue, I would even put Paul's order of different business models in a different order. I think the inner loops of the circular economy model are the most important ones. And this is about extending product life cycle and offering product as a service. And you can do that in many different ways. HP actually has the fastest growing business to consumer play in the circular economy for consumers, and it's called Instant Ink. And this is where you subscribe to a printing service rather than going and buying ink cartridges. And the environmental benefits are significant to doing that. And we're finding many customers are enjoying the convenience because it's more convenient, and certainly like the environmental benefits, and it has business benefits too.
In HP's case, we've got a company that's well on the path of designing to take advantage of the opportunities inherent in different circular economy models. But some products critical to manufacturing are just not designed to be recycled or reused. Chemicals, for example. One of our panelists today is the CEO of Fielding Chemical Technologies, Ellen McGregor. Founded in 1955, Fielding helps protect the air, soil, and water by turning waste chemicals into high-quality products. Fielding also reclaims waste refrigerant gases, restoring them to virgin standards. Their recycled products can now be found in over 30 countries, and Ellen is a two-time Clean50 honoree, so I'm delighted to have her with us today. Ellen, can you take us through how Fielding works? Where do you get your products? How do you do it? And take us through your life cycle.
Thank you, Gavin. Fielding sees waste chemicals as raw materials for their next life. And we support manufacturing industries right across Canada and into the United States. For instance, the aviation industry uses glycol as de-icing. We take their glycols and we turn them into a coolant for the automotive industry. So from one life to the next life. With refrigerant gases, when they become contaminated with oils that collected from the machineries that they've been operating in, they come to Fielding. And we restore them back to virgin spec, and we put them back in the marketplace for the same use. The pharmaceutical industry, it uses chemicals to create medications that we all rely upon. But they use chemicals that can be reused by converting them into press cleaners for the lithographic printing industry. Those are just some of the examples that Fielding has created over these many years.
Any of these coming from environmental spills, or are this all coming from industrial use?
Great question. No, it's all coming from industrial use. There really isn't many manufacturing companies that don't use some kind of chemical. And labs in hospitals, they have to use, cleaning agents all the time, especially now after COVID. They're even more sensitive. Well, what happens to those waste chemicals? Can they be reused? In some cases, absolutely, for the same purpose. In other cases, we extract the various components and we find new uses into creating new products from them. And sometimes they can't. And that's when Fielding creates a fuel from chemicals that have where there's no technology or economic value in recovery. Those chemicals become fuels for companies that use coal, and they become an alternative fuel, offsetting the use of coal.
What percentage of the stuff that you're treating, Ellen, ends up going back into the economy?
There's nothing we take in that we don't convert into some kind of product. It either becomes reused for the same use, it becomes reused for a new use, or it becomes used as a fuel. And that will be its final life.
In the end, are recycled chemicals more expensive than virgin chemicals?
Great question. In our industry, the expectation is that the pricing is somewhere between 10 and 15% less per liter than the cost of virgin chemical. And that's a real tough thing for a recycler to get around, because we have to meet the same kinds of standards that a company that is making virgin product makes.
In this case, circular economy is actually cheaper and less expensive, as well as being better for the environment.
It takes less tax on water. It takes less energy to recycle chemicals than it does to create virgin. And what we need is for chemical companies and recyclers to collaborate from the design, as Francis says, right through to the recovery and reuse again and again and again. That hasn't happened yet.
Why isn't everybody doing this?
Well, that's a really good question. What we need, when you compare what Canada does to other companies that have circular economies, what drives them is this will. The will from government, the will from the people that live in those countries, the expectation that products will be designed for reuse, the expectation that people will buy recycled products. That's lacking. And so as a result, there are many barriers that exist in Canada that don't exist in those countries. The regulatory framework is one of those barriers.
So if we wanted to get going on this, the government doesn't need to give you money. They just need to make some minor changes to regulations.
They need to create that vision. They need to create that culture inside their governments and outside their governments. They need to get rid of the barriers. They've plan, act, and measure differently than we've done before. And we need to think horizontally and collaborate right from the beginning of our ideas to create a product all the way to reuse again and again. And that's different thinking. It's needed thinking. And as Tima has said, it's profitable thinking.
To Tima and to Francis and to all of you, what would make the big difference right now in terms of driving the circular economy?
I would say it's sustainable procurement. And the reason I say that is because it's probably the least well-used tool in our toolbox and yet has huge potential to actually make a pull in the marketplace. I said that recycling plastics was one of the hard things to do. That's because you can't do it for less money than virgin plastic for the most part. And if there's virgin plastics competing there, why would people make the effort to move to a recycled plastic? So you need to be making a pull by specifying those kinds of things in procurement documents.
Okay. Tima?
What would make the circular economy take off in right now? And I would argue that now is a time more than ever before to make the circular economy work. And I think that there's a readiness. There's a readiness on the side of business and a readiness on the side of the public. But there's a lack of, and this is where I'm going to get into the barriers. One, on the demand side of for circular products. And this gets to what Francis is saying, that we need sustainable procurement. Imagine if then the government were to procure in a way that required at least some aspect of the circular economy. That would make a huge difference in driving the demand for it. That's the one side of things. But then on the other side of things, on the side of collaboration, on the side of business, we need much more collaboration with among businesses. And I think you've seen some wonderful examples from HP and from Fielding about what they were able to do. But they've done it independently, and they've done that with a great deal of will. But the government has an opportunity to share information about the waste that's produced among companies and that could be used or reused, as Ellen had said, so that it becomes input into other companies. But that requires information sharing, and it requires collaboration. The government has an amazing opportunity right now to bring the various actors together and to allow them to share the information, to provide that platform. The fourth piece that can't be dismissed is the importance of regulation, the importance of setting the standards of the amount of waste that can be produced. And if you lower the amount of waste that can be produced, then corporations, businesses will have to start using some of the waste. Pricing is another opportunity, that we need to price for those externalities. And waste, if it's seen as not, as Francis has said, more expensive to reuse than virgin, then organizations will see the opportunity to use the waste rather than to use virgin materials. And finally, the important point that I think Ellen was also talking about was education of the public. If we had people recognizing that when they put their stuff out in their front lawn to be picked up, recycling is not easy. And it's much better to lengthen the time of products and to reuse products and to disassemble products and to do what, let's say, HP is doing, what Fielding is doing. And so let's educate people so that we think about physical products in a very different way. Those are some relatively low-hanging fruit that I think society and business are ready for.
One of the things that both Francis and Tima mentioned was sustainable procurement. One of our panelists today is a leading expert on the state of sustainable procurement in Canada. Monica DuPont is the founder of Shift and Build, an independent consultancy focused on helping to advance social change, increase impact, and return on collective resources. She's been researching and collaborating on how to catalyze the advancement of sustainable procurement at scale since 2017. Monica, in Canada right now, where are we on sustainable procurement? Have we identified it as a priority, critical tool to leverage, or are we just nowhere really?
That's a good question. Thank you, Gavin, for having me here. This is a great discussion. And although the concept of the circular economy has recently gained traction, the concept of using procurement to advance policy objectives is in no way new. In fact, in 1992, the federal government committed that environmental considerations would be integrated into purchasing. We've had a number of commitments and statements. In 95, green procurement was identified as one of 7 priority areas for greening government operations. In the 2004 throne speech, the government recommitted to developing a government-wide procurement policy by 2006. And there have been a number of subsequent efforts, including the development of a policy, which was updated recently in 2018, and the establishment of the Center for Greening Government. So we have recognized the opportunity associated with sustainable procurement, and we've made a series of commitments and statements. Despite these, we are not seeing the level of implementation that we would expect. So in recent research generously funded by HP, we analyzed the integration of sustainability into 50 government RFPs across federal, provincial, and municipal jurisdictions. We were looking at 3 categories: construction, IT, and large services. And we found that only 12% of RFPs included sustainability as an independent criteria in the evaluation. And none of the RFPs that we looked at included sustainability as an independent criteria with a minimum of 10% weighting and language discussing accountability to the criteria. So if you think about this as a period that spans more than 25 years from a point where we stated that we were going to integrate environmental considerations into purchasing, this is a pretty meager level of sustainability integration. And so what we're seeing is that we're really not using the policy lever of procurement to advance our sustainability objectives. And without going beyond public commitments to ensure ownership over our desired outcomes and sufficient level of resources allocated to advancing said commitments, we'll continue to only make incremental progress.
25 years of talk and no action is very, very disappointing. Obviously, government has the ability to move further than they have to this point. Is there some barrier here that we're not properly understanding that keeps getting in the way? If so, what could they do to change that?
So I think that, there's been talk and there's been recognition of this as an opportunity, right? But the level of implementation is much, much lower than we need to see or would want to see. We've done a number of projects on sustainable procurement, and what we hear from various stakeholders is that there are a number of barriers to advancing sustainable procurement. So it's not a silver bullet. So the barriers range from resource and capacity gaps to process, cultural, market readiness, and regulatory barriers. So there's a number. Our system hasn't been designed to use procurement to advance sustainability, and so there are a number of existing barriers. These are real challenges and very much need to be addressed. I think the first step to addressing these is fundamental. What it is really a genuine commitment to advance the circular economy and sustainable or circular procurement. As such, what you would need would be an allocation of resources to prioritizing, strategizing, and addressing the specific barriers identified by stakeholders. So we can understand what they are. What we need to do is dig into them, start to see the breadth of solution areas that exist, and they range from capacity building to incentives and mechanisms of accountability. Once you analyze these, you clarify the implications, the benefits, the challenges, and then you need to make strategic decisions on which solutions would be most effective as part of a broader strategy. It's important work that needs to be done. And as Martin Luther King said, you don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. So if we genuinely commit to a circular economy and to using procurement as a tool to advance public policy objectives, that's our first step. We can see the following steps around clarifying and advancing the specific barriers that exist. And as we go further down the path, we'll begin to see the next steps required to really advance us towards a circular economy.
Frances, you and I have talked in the past about one of the challenges that sometimes you face, in that your company is the only company doing something, and the government seems to need 3 different possibilities before they can make it a criteria. Am I understanding that properly? Is that a barrier in terms of getting going on this?
It absolutely is, Gavin. Our system is designed to get best value for taxpayers, and everybody wants that. But what we get is a first past the post And in order to ensure that that actually is the lowest price without considering of the other costs of the ownership of a good or a service, they want 3 bids, which, makes sense. But if you are really trying to pull the market and there's only one company that can meet those requirements, if you're always making the requirements the middle of the road, that you're not going to get leadership or continued leadership or to create that pull in the marketplace. And a good example would be the use of recycled content in electronics today. The average percentage of post-consumer recycled content is hovering well below 5%. HP set a goal of 30% by 2025. I'm not sure if any of our competitors have done that. If you can't get any credit in an RFP situation for having higher percentages, then nobody else is going to do it, particularly when virgin is so cheap today.
So until the government actually says we're going to make this a criteria and we're going to stick to that, nothing's changing.
Exactly.
People will continue to simply do it the cheapest possible way possible.
Yeah.
Regardless of the impact on the environment.
Yeah, if you have no sustainability criteria that are specific and measurable in your bid documents that will incent better behavior out of businesses are really good at responding to what the customers ask them for. And to be smart as a business today, your customers are not really asking you for anything to do with sustainability in the procurement vehicles that they're using. So, why do we only have 13 companies with science-based targets in Canada? If we're in the decade of climate action and only 13 companies have set specific, measurable, science-based targets, we're in deep trouble.
What's going to help us move this forward right now? What could governments be doing right now that would help move this forward?
So I think, as has been mentioned, there's really that need to drive the demand for circular economy products and services and business models, but also supporting the supply side with the appropriate infrastructure, the policy frameworks and the frameworks that support collaboration like we've heard about already, and also efforts around workforce and skills development. As was touched on earlier by Tima, we know there's a big employment opportunity here. It's been estimated that for every 10,000 tons of waste that gets generated, only 1 job is created from landfilling, while you get about 25 jobs from manufacturing using recycled materials. And that's because the supply chain is complex, and it revolves around bringing those materials back into use and putting people to work to rethink those processes, etc. So there's a need for government to act as an enabler for change and to drive some of that market transition. And they can do that, as we've heard, through innovative policy and regulation, things like recycled content targets and right to repair legislation, or better labeling for consumers like environmental product declarations and other downstream regulations and policies like extended producer responsibility. There's that need, as Tima mentioned, for leveling the playing field using economic incentives or disincentives, things like grants or tax breaks for eco-design products or taxes on virgin materials, that need to really address the cost and pricing of externalities right now. There's an opportunity, I think, for government to start an innovation fund, which could really support entrepreneurs and small businesses and larger businesses too, where they're also incentivizing new technology like robotics or things like artificial intelligence that could help with sorting of materials, but also areas like bio-based alternatives, so bioplastics or compostable products, etc. So lots of opportunities there. There's that need for the required infrastructure to deal with it. So reverse logistics and local processing and recycling, remanufacturing. Government can support and partner with industry around that infrastructure. And we often see too much of an emphasis maybe placed on the environmental benefits and not enough on the economic and the innovation opportunities here. And what we're seeing out of Europe is that the government that's leading this is often the economic and jobs departments in collaboration with environment. So there's that need and that opportunity for cross-government collaboration, but also cross-sector, so working across different industries, given this is a systems thinking approach that needs to be brought. And then lastly, around the investment in workforce development and applying that circular lens to help improve the competitiveness of industries and the companies across the supply chain.
When you talk about pricing externalities, and anybody can jump in here for me, for Canadians who don't understand what you mean by pricing externalities, can somebody please explain that in a nice, crisp, easy to understand way?
Certainly, we heard earlier Tima mentioning sort of the hidden cost to healthcare, but there's also the impact on the environment. We know, for example, our natural ecosystems provide services such as rainwater purification and oxygen that we can breathe. And when we're not including the cost of the impacts on our human health or on the environmental health, when we're doing our cost of our products and services and sort of the materials that we're using to make those, then those costs are borne by governments and society as a whole, because we're losing out on our ecosystem services, or people are paying with healthcare costs from environmental pollution or chemicals in the environment that aren't being accounted for.
When we think about procurement, I touched on this briefly, if you're just measuring the price as a good or a service comes in the door, and then you're not measuring what it costs you to run that product, say energy or servicing or what, break fix, and then not even taking into account, certainly in the case of technology, the end of its first life and the fact that you've got to worry about data privacy there, those costs are being paid for by the organization as a whole, no matter which organization it is. And they're almost never counted at the front end. So you have this mini tragedy of the commons within the organization, that the organization as a whole is paying those costs, but nobody's accounting for them. So, even when we use dollars as the way of measuring the value of something, we're forgetting to use them to measure the total cost of something. It's crazy.
What we found is that organizations can look at total cost of ownership, right? So they can look at the cost that includes acquisition, maintenance, repair, and associated energy and disposal. And we actually, as a society, could look at not only total cost of ownership, but the full cost of a product or service that includes externalities. What we find right now, at least in the RFP analysis that we did, is that government jurisdictions are just looking at price. Of the 50 RFPs, there were only 2 that made any reference to total cost of ownership, and there was none that requested information that would enable total cost of ownership to be calculated. So that's a huge opportunity area and area of low-hanging fruit.
When we talk about total cost of ownership, at the end of the day, though, in a lot of cases, certainly for consumer products, the cost of disposal, the cost of landfilling is borne by the taxpayer. Yeah. It just doesn't factor into anybody's price. And so companies can create terrible packaging. They can build products that break 5 minutes later. And the cost is borne by society as a whole. How do we shift that so that the producer is now responsible for making sure that their product survives, beyond that 5 minutes and isn't packaged in 3 times the amount of packaging it needs?
This is where the product as a service thing really comes in. Because there's a closer relationship, and this is different than leasing, particularly in the technology sector, where you can be using remote monitoring techniques to detect whether a device is going to break down, whether you need to replace a battery or something before it actually fails. When you have that service-based model, there's an incentive for the manufacturer because they're paying the cost to fix something if it breaks down while it's being used by the customer. That sends a direct market signal to the manufacturer, make us a longer life, more durable product. And then if you can give it a second life, and we know that we've got some really good LCA data that's being released this week in our new Sustainable Impact Report, you can see the environmental benefits of extending product lives are quite significant. So when the manufacturer is taking back that product at the end of its first life directly, as opposed to it going through a collective somewhere, there's more incentive to do something better with it and give it a second or even third life.
Sorry, Francis, you mentioned LCA, and I certainly know what it means, but others watching this may not.
Life cycle assessment is one of the best tools we have to measure all of the impacts, those externalities, and things that we might not think about across the entire life cycle of a product. So from when it's being mined to when it's being recycled or even landfilled potentially. So you're measuring the impacts across a wide variety of attributes. So it's a complicated thing, but it usually gives you some good data that you can compare.
One of the obstacles that I've heard can be a challenge is the fact that we have a different set of jurisdictional rules everywhere across Canada in terms of what governments are supposed to do or what municipalities are supposed to do with different waste streams. And that there seems to be different regulations that manufacturers have to conform to that might be dramatically different in Alberta than Ontario, for example. Is this an obstacle to being able to build a truly circular economy in Canada?
So we've been doing extended producer responsibility for about 30 years, and we've got a pretty wide scope of products that we cover with EPR legislation, but it's a smidgen of all of the products and goods that we bring into the country. So it's one way of dealing with things. I would argue it's a regressive and afterthought and really doesn't drive the kind of behavior that we want. So as a tool for government to use, it's kind of a necessity, but it's never going to get us to where we need to be, which is leading edge innovation to really push the needle on this.
Paul, you've got some thoughts.
Yeah, Francis is absolutely right, because the idea of circular economy is to avoid and move away from the concept of waste in the first place. And that's really about redesigning the system further upstream. So procurement and content, redesigning packaging, for example, to eliminate extra layers of packaging is the direction we want to go. What we have had in the past and still plays an important role for managing waste at the end of the day is extended producer responsibility that then passes the cost of managing that material and that waste to the producer and away from the consumer or the local governments that have traditionally had to deal with that. So what you're seeing is areas like tires and paints have been around for a long time. Bottles and cans, you can pay a small fee and then the company is responsible for bringing that back into the supply chain at the end of it all. But now that's being expanded through extended producer responsibility to areas like mattresses and furniture and other areas. But to Francis's point, it will never cover all of the different products and streams that are out there. And it really deals with the problem more so than providing a solution.
Please correct me if I'm wrong or fill me in where I'm mistaken. Part of the challenge is we're making it essentially inexpensive enough for people to do this that it becomes cheaper to, for example, send electronic waste to China for disposal than it is to actually try and remanufacture something and reclaim the gold in that product ourselves.
Let me be clear that the extended producer responsibility programs in Canada do not allow the export of materials to China unless they're commodities like metals or plastics. So I'll just be clear on that. There are standards in place. But the point around it's still cheaper to, shred things and then mechanically separate them, losing some of the value, in fact, much of the value, I'd argue, certainly from an electronic standpoint, than it is to pay somebody to take those apart. That is absolutely true.
Is there an advantage to the federal government leading a strategy and that deals with some of these elements?
The thing is, they don't have jurisdiction over quote unquote waste because it's a provincial jurisdiction. And that's where we get into the problems of different regulations in different provinces covering different types of goods. And it gets to be, we're a big country, but from a population standpoint, the costs of complying with 10 or 12 different sets of regulations with virtually no environmental benefit beyond a bare minimum, in my mind, is cost prohibitive. So we need some more harmonization to be going on, and that's not something the federal government can do because it's a provincial jurisdiction.
One could argue that they weren't supposed to impose a carbon tax either, but they did.
But that's one thing. That's carbon. We're talking everything that comes into the country or is manufactured here, right?
A little more complication to what Francis said. Waste is generally a provincial matter, but not always. So in some cases, like with refrigerant gases, it's federally legislated. But when it comes to organic chemicals, it's not. It's provincially mandated. So there's a lack of harmonization on all sorts of levels. And then you have your municipal guidelines and practices, which may be divisive or maybe aligned with provincial and federal. And enforcement drops through the cracks all over the place. So it's complicated. It's solvable, but it's complicated.
Can the federal government improve outcomes by collaborating with the provinces to harmonize various waste regulations across the country?
Well, I do think so. I think in the mandate letters that, the first round, it was pretty clear. It didn't happen, where the ministers of environment were supposed to come together and create some kind of harmonization of how they regulate and what they regulate. But let's not give up. I think there's lots of role for when you look at Holland, their circular economy was built because of federal political will. It was intentional, it was disciplined, it was unapologetic. And it's, they're a real model for us to look at. Now, we are complicated because of all these other ways that we've broken up legislative frameworks. That said, it's doable with the right political will.
What did Holland do, Ellen?
Well, Holland, of course, they had a benefit that we lack. We talk about the threats, and Paul's alluded to, described them rightly so about what will happen if we just continue to deplete our resources. But the reality is, if it's not happening today, people don't feel it, and they're not prepared to pay for it. And that's a sad reality. In Holland, they had a problem with their water because of the high water table. Contamination was getting into their water, and people were getting sick. So it was an easy fix for the federal government in Holland, who they have the jurisdiction for environmental management, to say, we are going to create an economy here. They didn't use the term circular economy. They said, we're going to make sure that we recycle as much as we can. And anything that must be burned is going to be burned for energy. And they delivered on that commitment. They took down the incinerators that could not be converted, and they retrofitted the incinerators that could be converted to energy from waste facilities. And they gave notice to their people. They said, in 4 years, this is going to happen. And in those 4 years, that created business certainty, and it created the appetite for innovation and for entrepreneurs to connect with academia, to connect with investors, to build recycling plants. And they did it. So a little easier, Gavin, because the feds had the jurisdiction and they had a burning platform that was felt immediate, as opposed to a burning platform that we're on, which is in 2050. It's still doable. Still doable.
In terms of the role of the federal government in line with the provinces, and I think one of the biggest barriers we are seeing is that lack of harmonization across the provinces and territories. And when China, for example, put out its national sword policy, which essentially said they wouldn't take our plastics any longer for recycling, at least our contaminated plastics for recycling. Those provinces that had a strong recycling and extended producer program in place, like British Columbia, fared far better than other provinces in dealing with that stream at the end of the day. And there is a role that the Canadian Council for Ministers of Environment and the federal government are playing, and that's with respect to dealing with the zero plastics waste strategy. And so we're seeing that harmonization could have a role to play around raising the bar, making sure that Canadian provinces aren't stuck with higher costs, for example, but are also leading on the innovation side for how to get out in front. And like the Netherlands, that are really focused on bio-based economy, bioeconomy, there's an opportunity for us to be using our natural resources for producing the feedstocks for the circular economy, rather than being adopters in other places.
When we talk about harmonization, we're talking about harmonization across 3 levels of government: the federal, the provincial, and the municipal. And that's really pertaining to issues like regulation and pricing. And those are really hard to harmonize across the 3 levels of government, just because there's so many provinces and there's so many municipalities. But there's other mechanisms that government can use, and we shouldn't dismiss those. And so For example, the federal government could have grants. And so giving money out for innovation is a transition policy. Instead of giving money out to retain old industries, the innovation grants could be directed towards a transition to a new economy and one that leads us to circular economy. And that doesn't require harmonization. And that is much more of a supply-based model, and so that they become the incentors and not just the regulators. And so there is another mechanism that they have at play. And the other piece of it that I don't want to lose is the sustainable procurement, which is when they create demand. And Francis has the numbers, but the amount of product that's bought by our government, so you can just target each one separately, whether it's a federal government department or provincial government, if each one starts to source differently, that could start to create a cascade of changes across all of business and governments. And the third one, I don't want to dismiss this one, is education. Just public service messages to say the importance of sustaining the products within our economy can do a vast amount of good, especially in today's society. The turn that we saw so quickly with COVID-19 was truly inspirational. Here's the threat, an immediate threat to our human health, and we are able to move on a dime and change the way that we socially interact and the way that we consume. There's no reason that we couldn't turn towards a circular economy quickly just through that public education process. So there are other mechanisms that the government has beyond the traditional regulation and pricing.
Is the fact that there's 4 levels of government in itself the major freaking problem?
It is insane. It's very difficult for a business. We're right in the heart of Mississauga, and so we have to appease to Mississauga, but then we could be inspected by the region or the province or the feds. All of that happens here. So is it the major problem? No. The major problem is a lack of political will. The major problem, in my estimation, is that the technologies that we use today to look after waste were really, really cool when what we did with waste was put it in the rivers and the oceans and the air and the ground. I mean, that's what we did. And so when they introduced, landfills and deep wells and incineration, it was a step up. But those days should be over. We are regulated around that paradigm. Our behaviors are around that paradigm, and we need to change that paradigm.
Is there a risk to Canada if the government fails to act now? And is there an upside if we do act now?
We live in a country with an excess of natural resources, and whether it's energy resources or water resources or even just land. And because of that, we have this orientation for extraction, which inflates our GDP, and then landfill or it goes to air or water because we have so much of it. But at some point, we will lose our competitive position globally because every other country is going to build the products, the systems, the local supply chains, that they won't need our resources anymore. And if we don't build our local resources and our local supply chains in a way that becomes circular, Canada will start to lose our competitive positioning. We will lose the fight internationally. And we won't have a healthy ecosystem to go along with it.
When we look at circular economy, for those who want to get into the recycling game, the biggest threat to being profitable is supply of the materials that they recycle. Biggest threat. If you don't have the goods, you can't recycle. And so it follows at such a great time as a post-COVID, as people recovering from COVID. Think about the dependency we had on other nations to supply the very goods that we needed. It will follow that if we build a circular economy, we will be building a manufacturing economy again. The two will collaborate. The products manufactured will be products remanufactured. They will come together. And you tie that to Francis's earlier comments about sustainable procurement, that's where it begins. It will just unfold, and we will be more profitable as a nation. We will keep our talent here who leave for other places. We will keep them here. Yeah, I'm really excited about the future. Can you tell?
I'm going to throw one at you, Gavin, here. And this is a quote from a TCO white paper that I just read that said, "Without circular procurement, your sustainability work will be seen as just window dressing."
I think that the sectors that have the most opportunity for change is the fossil fuel sector. And it's such a significant part of our economy. And so I think that we have to think about repositioning fossil fuels as not just energy providers, but also the providers of goods that remain within the economy. And that requires them to rethink what they do. And I see this not necessarily as an entrenchment or resistance to change, but a need for them to change.
Change is hard, and we're asking businesses to start to change in ways that potentially make them less competitive against their competitors who are just doing straight linear economy things. And most businesses are not going to be willing to sacrifice profit and lose market share. So now we're asking them to do something that is very difficult to do, requires change at all levels of an organization. Meanwhile, the competitors are not doing anything different. So this is a hard nut to crack to make that transition. And we need to be thinking about how we incent more companies to do that, which brings us back to procurement.
Building on that, I think at a macro level, we need to recognize this is a drastic shift from the way we are currently doing things, right? So it is a significant leap forward. And I think we really need to invest in securing the political will to establish and commit to this vision, because without the market certainty that Ellen mentioned, we will not get organizations to invest in transitioning their businesses into a circular model. We need that commitment that we're going here in 4 or 5 years, this is where we're heading, and these are the mechanisms that we're putting in place to collectively move industries and sectors in that direction.
And that's only going to happen with both political will and either consistent political party at the helm or commitment from all political parties to toe that line.
Yeah.
So that's not an insurmountable barrier, but it's certainly not an easy one.
No, not an easy one. But I think if we recognize that and we collectively focus on working on that together, that's part of the process.
I'm going to come back and ask each of you if you had a 30-second summary to give us of what to you is the most critical things that we could be doing right now.
If I were government, I would state a vision and I'd excite the opposition, because this isn't going to be a 4-year term project. This has to get government buy-in no matter what the color is. So the opposition parties have to sign up and say, we'll support this going forward. For me, articulate the vision. No, I love the work that team is leading, and that's really important. So step 2 is collect data. And I think you've got the right people around the table, people way smarter than I'll ever be, but I look up to them. And that's part of the solution too, is collect the data so that when they do institute reforms, that it's the right way the first time. Build a culture to grow a circular economy inside the government and out, get people excited about it. Reform your regulatory frameworks that stand in the way. Pick something, pick a winner, follow it, measure it, be transparent, tell the people, get people involved. And that will lead to the next and the next and the next. And Paul's got great examples that they could build on. So that's my submission to start.
If I was to say that there's one policy measure that I would like our government to do, it would be innovation grants. And these grants would be directed for those organizations that are willing to mobilize the circular economy. We have the Supercluster program, fantastic program that was targeted to innovation, but it's innovation for innovation's sake. Let's make innovation towards products and services that will not only make money for the company, but will have a positive environmental impact.
I'm going to build on Ellen's point. We need a vision, and with that vision, we need genuine commitment to allocating the resources required to make this circular economy the way that we work and the way that we engage. Let's take ownership not over the policies or the statements, but over the outcomes. Let's invest the required resources. Yes, political will be difficult. Let's not kid ourselves, it won't be easy. But without it, our progress is probably going to be pretty consistent with the meager progress we've seen on sustainable procurement over the last 25 years. So let's build the business case. We can see the value and move that forward.
And I'm going to build on that by saying 100% that we need to invest in the resources. We need to use the tools already at our disposal. Total cost of ownership is a fantastic tool that we're not using at all today. And if we could just invest in training the people to use it and making sure that it is used and then measuring those outcomes so that we don't have the mini tragedies in the commons happening, we'll start to kickstart the circular economy really quickly.
And I think we need to admit that the current global system of production and consumption is unsustainable from an economic, social, and environmental perspective, and that this circular economy transition offers $1 trillion business and investment opportunity for Canada and globally become more competitive and resilient in that sense. And the only really way to get there is through more cross-sector and cross-government collaboration. We can look at what leading countries like Finland have done in this space and develop industry roadmaps, because we know every industry and every sector is unique and has its own complexities, but we need to be thinking about systems and how they link together. So I think government has a key role there to play in terms of convening and bringing people together to explore those opportunities and what they mean for Canada.
One of the challenges is that we've got civil servants who view anything that's change as inherently hugely risky and something that we shouldn't do. How do we get around that?
In scope, much bigger. But every business leader has the same issue. People are people. They don't like change, and they feel it's easier to roll over a contract than do the due diligence to find another supplier. That's no different. That's a matter of scale. It's a matter of that political will, that creating that culture and empowering your staff to do, to make change. Incenting them in whatever ways are required. Like, I don't run government, but here I give bonuses to people that bring ideas that translate to increased sales or increased environmental outputs. So that's the kind of thing a government has to do. Run it like a business, and you'll find that people will change. That's my view. That's what Hazel McCallion did in this city. She ran it like a business, and people were incented to do the right things. They were empowered to do the right things. And that's why we've got, people at the city level here in the city of Mississauga that are very nimble compared to other stories I hear from other cities. So,
other jurisdictions.
Yes.
All we need to do is look outside of our borders to see what others are doing and realize that the world is moving quickly in this space around us. At the World Economic Forum, the OECD, other key players are pushing circular economy, and it is a competitive advantage in that sense. But also on the ground in our communities and our cities, you've got entrepreneurs and all kinds of innovators coming up with new business models that are working. So the risks are there, but there's opportunities that outweigh those risks that I think there's enough evidence to support that.
We know that people even today can graduate minus Tima's wonderful team of people, but you can go through all of our education system and come out not understanding what the word sustainability means, never mind how to apply it. So that means that, the very competent civil service that we saw step up during COVID and doing some amazing things and executing really well, just don't have the education that they need. So, massive training to get people to understand this. Now, that won't happen fast enough, but it's one of the key tools to showing people how important this is. And, most civil servants won't have even heard of the circular economy. So we've got a huge re-education campaign that's necessary.
I would like to reframe that question or that problem. I don't think that this is an issue of the civil service. I think that this is an issue of the elected officials. And what is very exciting about the circular economy is that, for at least this government right now, says that they care about the economy and that they care about the environment. And they have made those commitments very, very vocal. The circular economy allows us to marry the two together. And so there is no reason for us not to move to the circular economy, no reason for the federal government, the elected officials, not to understand the processes that can get us there. There is no other mechanism that I know that will lead Canada to marrying both the economy and the environment simultaneously. I teach business students, and I've taught business students for 25 years. And there is a palpable change in the last couple of years. And we can see that students are asking every single organization for whom they want to work, what are you doing about the environment? What are your values? What's your purpose? And that's happened very recently. If we don't, as a community, as a national community, recognize that there is a shift among young people who are mobilizing, we will miss this opportunity to incent people, to excite people, and to help them change us towards something that's going to make our world a whole lot more sustainable.
I couldn't agree with you more. We bring students from McMaster here to Ryerson. They're so excited about what they do. They want to work for an organization like a Fielding, not necessarily for Fielding, but be part of that movement. I couldn't agree with you more.
We are seeing students and young people everywhere, just in Canada, in a business school, mobilize. And they care about these bigger issues. They care. This isn't the 1980s, it's all about me. This is really about us now. And they're seeing the writing on the wall. If our government doesn't address it, they will lose the faith, the support of our current generation. It's very sad.
And so there's a massive risk rather than, the risk is in not moving. The risk is in not taking action rather than in taking action.
Absolutely.
Trying to change things.
Yeah, the risks are definitely greater in not taking action than in actually trying to change and failing. And I think that there is going to be many fits and starts along the way, but if we don't try, we've lost the game.
Yep.
Right. I'd like to thank today's expert panelists, Tima Bensel, Paul Shorthouse, Francis Edmonds, Ella McGregor, and Monica DuPont. To sum up, what we've heard is that there is a worldwide shift underway right now towards a circular economy. For instance, designing products to be able to deconstruct them easily, to be able to reuse their component parts, and to finding ways to take waste from one manufacturing process and make it an input into another. We've heard that other places like Europe are leading in this area right now and advancing quickly and with vision. And while Canada has many resources and raw materials that we sell now to these other jurisdictions, as those jurisdictions change their habits, instead of buying new inputs from us, they will be looking to the circular economy to provide those resources from deconstructing end-of-use products they already have. So there's a huge risk for us in not moving to this model, and quickly. We've heard that a circular economy drives 10 times more jobs recapturing waste per ton than throwing it into a landfill does. We've heard that it's going to take leadership from government to drive this needed evolution. There are 4 things that governments need to do. First, governments need to articulate a vision for the circular economy and educate Canadians about it, as well as seeking buy-in from the other political parties. Second, government needs to create an innovation grants to advance the circular economy as quickly as possible. And third, we need more regulations that insist on recycling or that make single-use plastics, for example, just way more expensive. Finally, and most importantly, government needs to set an example by finally implementing the sustainable procurement practices they've been talking about for over 25 years now. We have a catch-22 we need to eliminate in order to move past this obstacle. Government policy demands that no procurement requirements can be so tightly written that fewer than 3 bidders will qualify. So even though one company, such as HP, for example, can demonstrate that all the plastic in their printers is recycled, so long as no other printer company can say that, the requirement to use recycled plastic in government printers will never be demanded. We are now incenting companies not to innovate and not to become more sustainable. That needs to change. That will drive a need for the recycled plastic that are going into landfill right now. The other thing that needs to change in government procurement is a failure to address the total cost of ownership when making buying decisions. Government procurement policies right now look only at the initial price. Shifting to including the total cost of ownership as a key way to measure whose product is the least expensive is an excellent way to drive change and save governments money over the long haul, while simultaneously rewarding sustainability practices and lowering our carbon footprint. Government spending in Canada drives 10% of GDP. If governments were to set this example, companies would quickly act to make the changes in order to still be able to sell to the government. Prices would drop, and the rest of Canada could quickly follow suit. All of these changes are critical now. We're using 4 times more resources each year than the Earth can replenish, and that's a recipe for certain disaster. We are absolutely in a hole, and we need to stop digging. As Canadians, we're always told that the fossil fuel extraction industry is the beating heart of our economy. That's absolutely not true. And here's the other thing. $1 million invested in the fossil fuel industry produces just 2.7 jobs. $1 million invested in any of the Clean Reset programs on which we were suggesting that government focus produces somewhere between 5 and 20 jobs. Clean jobs, jobs of the future, and programs where taxpayer investment would typically be fully repaid to the government within 2 to 3 years. It's not just spending. Government can drive immediate jobs action by making some basic regulatory changes. The Clean50 CleanReset plan includes a broad range of ideas for government reset action, captured in a series of webcasts, podcasts, and videos, all featuring Clean50 award-winning experts. I encourage you to watch or listen to them all and get them from the same place where you consumed this one. More importantly, I'll ask you to do 2 other things. The first is to forward links to these videos to all of your elected officials. In particular, let's get MPs of all parties better educated on what the low carbon economy can look like for Canada, because many don't have a really good idea. The clean economy is durable, well-paid jobs that are not reliant upon the price of oil, as determined by Vladimir Putin or some Saudi sheikh. And the second thing is to send an email, or even better, make a phone call to your MP. Ask them to vote for a clean reset going forward. Tell them it's time to build a low-carbon Canada for the 21st century. For more information on the Clean50 and all our past award winners, please visit clean50.com. I'd like to thank the Trache Family Foundation and the Ivy Foundation for their incredible support, as well as that of our other sponsors, who contributed to making these casts possible. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'd like to thank you for contacting your MP. It's critical. Let's make sure that this time through we have a clean reset.